Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ori. I'm the Group Program Manager on the Live Services team, specifically responsible for the Live Framework and our developer platform efforts all up. You can think of my job as delighting developers on our engineering side of the house. I wake up every day and make sure that all you guys are really, really happy. Hopefully you'll be happier in an hour and 15 minutes from now. Quick orientation slide. My guess is you're going to see this slide about 30 times over the 3-4 days of this event. As you've heard about the Azure Services Platform, you saw it in the keynotes yesterday. It looks a little off screen, but that's okay. Today we're going to talk about the live services portion, an integral part of our new cloud platform offering. This one is actually pretty unique in the sense that it isn't just about the cloud. This is one of the core components of the services platform that's about connecting clients and clouds together, and we'll see what that really means today. So agenda, we're going to spend a few moments. You're going to, forgive me, we're going to go a little Zen on you, the live services Zen, or the mesh Zen, as I call it, for a little bit. We're going to spend, again, I don't know why you can't see the top of the decks again. We're going to talk about a bunch of hard problems with having projection issues. We're going to talk about live services, and we're going to spend the most of the talk on live framework. Wow, there we go. Nice, much better. And write a bunch of code and show you a good lap around live framework, as we call it. I'll tell you about all the great sessions you can learn about live framework. And we're blown off the screen again. Amazing. So the Zen of mesh. A couple of years ago, we were sitting down. You can think a bunch of Microsoft propeller heads sitting down, watching industry trends. And a few things sort of hit us in the head. And you might sit today and think, wow, that's really obvious. But sometimes it's the really obvious things that turn out to be the most profound. And if you think about the four key trends, as you notice out there, data, what software and digital life experiences are all about, they're really about these four key dimensions. We'll start with data. So if you think about sort of what data means today, data, like this massive data explosion problems. Think about all the digital data that you actually care about, your music, your photos, your videos, all the stuff that produces data, and how hard it is to manage your data today, all the things you want to do with your data. And I look at myself as a personal example, not necessarily the average case, but certainly something that can project out a trend. You know, a few years ago, I would say I'd manage 200, 300 gigs of data at home. Today, we manage about 6 terabytes. And granted, my mom doesn't have 6 terabytes at home, but she's already noticing that kind of pain. So lots and lots of data. The second trend you'll notice is, of course, this device trend that you see and hear all over the place. That's really the notion that digital lifestyle devices, like the number that I've added to my life, I count at home, we manage 29 separate digital lifestyle devices that either produce or consume data. Count that between your mobile phones, your media centers, your PCs, your Macs, you know, if you have home automation system, your car, anything basically with a CPU in it. And the challenge with devices and data together is that devices now are adding or producing more data, right? My Comcast PVR at home is recording TV shows and producing data. My digital camera produces data. And all these displays, all these digital devices, thanks, Dan, that are actually want to consume all this data. And a lot of the times the device that produces the data is not necessarily the device that wants to consume it. So you have this digital device explosion problem, which is only producing and consuming more data, which is causing more data explosion. And then you add applications, which of course is the way you interact with data on devices. So Media Center as the application as opposed to the device. Things on your phone, things on your PC that are also exploding. And a lot of the times it turns out that you want to use the same application, the same style of experience across multiple devices, but in a slightly more unique way, right? So I don't want to watch videos on my phone the same way that I watch it on my Media Center. Or I don't want to consume my email on my phone the same way I consume it on a PC with a 30-inch display. And then came this fourth dimension of software, the fourth dimension of sort of the digital life, is this people, this whole social aspect. And a few years ago, you probably noticed the trend. How many people are on Facebook or Twitter or MySpace or one of those types of social experiences? So much more of software or digital life is about sharing your experiences with others, sometimes 1 to 5, sometimes 1 to a million. And all of a sudden, you're living in a world where, you know, I'll take my mom, who's like the least technologically inclined person. She's like Ori was the power button kind of person. But she has, you know, 3, 4 devices, and it gets to her that her phone and her PC and at work and home totally don't work together. She's like, I can't get my contacts from my phone to my PC. She can't get her pictures that I upload because she doesn't quite figure out the web browser thing. And you put this all together, and it turns out to be really, really complicated to build software that lives in this world where these 4 dimensions are constantly sort of growing and exploding. And as you project out, this is really the world we're all going to be living in, you guys live this day to day, but hardcore, like 80% of our users, whether they're corporate and, the blending of corporate data and corporate software with your personal life, you do more work at home, you do more home stuff at work. It's going to be really tough to write software in this world. I'll give you one sort of a quick example, show you a quick demo of one type of experience in this world, hopefully tickle your imagination a bit. Let me switch to, actually, can we get the second screen up? This is, what you're looking at here is, let's look at my Media Center first, and we'll explain what's going on over there. So imagine you have a device like Media Center. Media Center is actually a really interesting device because it has a lot of metadata you're interested in, not just data, not just photos or music or videos or things like that, but a lot of metadata, the TV programming guide, what you watch, your favorites are always in Media Center, like the programs you record. So I use it as an example. So if I go to this Media Center, which is, by the way, all the way back in Redmond, and let me go ahead and we'll pick a show in a second. We'll pick this show in a moment. I'll switch to the browser before we do that. What you're seeing in the browser, this is my live desktop. The live desktop, think of it as a device that you get from Microsoft that's added to your mesh. Right? You've all used it since you're live mesh users. It has the ability to access data, access your devices, and now we're introducing the capability for you to access applications, and you're going to learn a lot about that at this conference. This application, the WebGuide Mesh, basically, our Media Center takes all its metadata, pumps it into the local live operating environment on the Media Center, and that data gets synchronized up to the web. So now I can access my WebGuide trivially from anywhere in the world just by going up to my live desktop. So if I go over here and let's pick a show, let's pick Arthur, and let's click record. Now, when I click record in my live desktop in this mesh-enabled web application, that piece of metadata that I want to record the show, actually, let's switch back over here so you can see it. That metadata has now been synchronized through the mesh over to my Media Center, a completely different device, which will now record that piece of data and send that metadata and the data with it back up to the cloud and all my other devices, which means that if I switch, let's say, to this device, which is a completely different device over here, I can now access that same metadata. Let me put this application out. This is that same exact Silverlight mesh-enabled web application running on my desktop in a host, essentially. It's able to talk to the local live operating environment, essentially get all its data from the local device. It can run offline. I can work with it when I'm on the airplane. That metadata has synchronized from a Media Center to my live desktop to an application that's running on my desktop. And of course, if I go over here, and let's bring up my mobile phone, which is sitting right here, so you can see it. Let me go to the guide. Anybody remember what channel that was? I think it was KCTS. There we go. Scroll down. And now my mobile device, again, that metadata and potentially the data for this program has showed up and synchronized to this local device. Now, the application that I've written actually theoretically should never make a network call, right? Always talk to the local instance of the live operating environment. Doesn't have to worry about synchronization, doesn't have to worry about anything else, but is magically able to move all the parts that it cares about between my devices and between the different sort of applications or interaction models that I have that I use day to day. Now, if you think about what it takes to create such an application, let's talk about some of the hard problems that we face building software that's so connected and brings all these things together. Well, one of the challenges, of course, you need some central entity like a cloud service that sits there and is able to sort of bridge all of these devices together, some central service in the cloud, sort of the foundation. One, you need one of those. Second, you need to worry about identity. Identity is a really hard problem, and a lot of people sort of segment it to just be about a person, like one person, one identity. Identity has two kind of interesting dimensions. One of them is about, I think, authentication, which is really sort of who you are. And then there's an authorization part, which is really what you can do. So you might trust some people, and some people you might not. Some you want them to have access to a certain element in your digital life, and some you might not. Now, the interesting thing about identity is we no longer can live in a world where you just identify people. Now we have to identify devices, authenticate and authorize, identify applications, authenticate and authorize them. Somebody was telling me a stat the other day, something like 60,000 mobile phones are left in a London taxi every month or something like that. Now imagine in a world where your mobile phone is such an integral part of your life, synchronizing all the stuff that's important to you, you lose it. The first thing you want to do is essentially sever that connection and say that device is no longer part of my life. And a lot of challenges around identity. Then there's data. So data, we can represent a million different ways. And the notion of universal representation for data, that regardless of what platform you're writing code on, is it, if you're a JavaScript guy and you expect JSON, if you're a .NET guy and you want strongly typed C# objects with IntelliSense and Visual Studio, or you're a PHP guy or Ruby, how do you let all platforms, programming languages, device sort of play equally in this universal sort of data world? The fourth hard problem is devices. Devices are really tough to manage, right? How does your software discover devices? How does it talk to it? How do you know where they are, what you can do with them without somebody providing all that infrastructure for you? Synchronization. Now, sync is really interesting because a lot of people confuse or sort of interchange sync and offline. They're really not the same thing, although closely related. Synchronization is fundamentally about moving data closer to people and applications that sort of want to consume that data. And one example, how many people here use Outlook? Outlook is a highly connected application that heavily relies on synchronization. That enables it to go offline so you can read your mail on the airplane, but really, all the stuff you do in Outlook most of the time is talking to a local cache. Why? Because this gives you better performance, lots more flexibility you could do with that data, so you don't have to constantly move that 500 meg mailbox between the client and the cloud. Doing sync well is really hard. Hopefully, most of you probably know that, but especially when you're talking about devices that have very weird sort of topology, very weird sort of network connections between them. They potentially, routers and NATs in between, and making that comms and sync work. Lots of conflict management. Imagine you're now adding other people's devices and third-party applications. Sync is really hard. Sorry, we went too far. So if you think about sharing as a core element of sync, you're not just wanting to share across multiple devices. Can we actually get that screen over here as well? Thanks. Sorry, I didn't notice that it flipped out. You think about sharing, the ability to share not just data, but applications as well with other people is actually also pretty challenging. Right? So think about the data you want to share, the photos you want to share with a family. You're not sharing 1 to 1,000,000, but sharing between 1 and 10 people in your family or your friends or your colleagues at work that you want to collaborate, and taking care of all of that. State awareness is really complicated. If you think about, I look at my brother, he's 17, I love the guy, but he's just obsessed with being sort of constantly up to date with what's going on in his world. 2 hours of Facebook a day, an hour on Twitter, 200 SMS messages. And it's not just people, applications are completely obsessed with state. You always want to know what's going on, what's the state of things, what devices are online, what are my friends doing, what is this application doing, how's the machine doing. And state is really hard. And of course, communications. Peer-to-peer communications between devices, tunneling through NATs and firewalls, all these really hard things that if you don't solve, really writing software in a highly connected sort of this uber digital lifestyle is just really difficult. And I'll tell you personally, I have to say I'm really disappointed that most of the software experiences in my life are sort of okay, but they're not great. Right? They're not fantastic. You don't really enjoy a lot of these things because they just don't work that well together. We believe we have the responsibility as a platform company, and you, of course, as developers, to kind of fix that. And this is where live services start to come in. So think of live services as a set of building blocks for really helping you handle user data and application resources that can really connect these applications between millions of people. Today, you might or might not know this, but Microsoft runs some of the largest online sort of live services around. Our identity system, we do 1.2 billion authentications a day against our identity system. We have about 380 million plus downloads of the client apps that talk to this system. We have 460 million entries in our contacts database. Those are people with address book, in which we have over 30 billion relationships between people. These are people that have indicated, these are my friends, this is people in the address book. Massive system. We have more petabytes stored in data center than I can even describe to you, and over 300 million connections on our relay network that connect sort of peer-to-peer messenger and things like that. Massive set of services. And that's a really great foundation, but honestly, it's not enough. And this is where we've started to add these new capabilities you're learning about at this conference we call mesh services. Mesh services have those 4 dimensions, and only enough they kind of match those 4 dimensions of the digital life between users, help you manage users' digital life, their preferences, their settings, their data, their devices, connecting these together, letting you sort of tap into that power of the mesh, managing applications, application data, and application binaries, and of course, synchronization that sort of makes a lot of this work. Now, One thing that's pretty challenging with a lot of these services out there today, you'll see a lot of are sort of very siloed. So there could be one service that does one thing really well, one service for sync, you can go out there and do that, one service for connectivity, one service for deploying apps. But something that really brings it all together, makes it really easy to us developers to program against, doesn't really exist yet. And this is where the Live Framework comes in. Think of Live Framework as sort of the universal way to program against live services in a consistent manner that's easy to get started, easy to work with day to day with your existing skills, no need to rewrite your applications, all that good stuff. And instead of, I could spend the next hour telling you about Live Framework in detail, and instead I thought we would actually learn in code. I'll have a couple of slides at the end I'll show you, so we'll take apart the Live Framework, but we're just going to learn as we write code. And we're going to write lots of it. And I think I have a bunch of really, really cool Live Framework posters in here. For every line, for every mistake you find in the code I write, raise your hand and I'll give you a poster right afterwards. I have about 250, so that should hopefully keep us, hopefully be good enough. So let's close these puppies and open up this guy. Usually my favorite kind of demos, if you've seen me demo before, are ones where we'll literally do file new project. The problem is we're going to write so much code, I had to get us a really snazzy UI template to work from. I'm a designer by trade, if you can't tell. This app, what I've done is there's no code behind, it's just a bunch of controls. And I tried to pick all the controls that you'll find in the Live Mesh experience. And we're going to essentially write the entire Live Mesh application from scratch. So we'll deal with devices, enumerating those, mesh objects, create new ones, load them, data feeds, files, filters, news, media resources, contacts, profiles, notifications. Those are all the elements in our UI. And if you were a good WPF dude, you could probably take this and build our Live Mesh application in an hour. The cool thing is the Live Mesh application, if you probably didn't know this, is completely built on top of Live Framework. It uses no internal API. So all the APIs you see in Live Framework essentially enable you to build all those things. So let's get going. It all starts with connections, so we're going to go ahead and connect. And to do that, we're going to take LiveFX and new up a new instance of the live operating environment. The live operating environment is our service composition engine. Think of it as an engine that composes all the various services we run in the data center, puts a common programmable head on top of them. It's a lot like CLR to Windows. So what about CLR? If you take all the Win32 APIs we have in Windows and you put an engine on top of it that makes it all look and feel the same between windowing and memory management and file system management and networking, common collections, common events, common data types. Very similar concept. So live operating environment runs in the cloud. We have a client version of the live operating environment that runs on every device in your mesh that you get to talk to as well, and that's what connects your device to the cloud. So if we want to connect, let's do livefx.connect. It's really not that complicated. In this particular case, I'm going to pass my credentials, which are in a settings file so you can't see them because these are my real credentials. You can use delegated authentication. You can use app IDs. There are lots of different ways to connect. We're just going to use this for now because it's nice and easy. And the mandatory message box to tell us we actually have connected. OK. That's all it takes to connect. Not super exciting, but you got to do that. OK. Now let's work with our devices. So we'll wire up a load button to get all the devices in my mesh. And for that, it's literally as easy for every device in livefx.mesh.devices.entries. The reason you have to go to .entries is because everything in the mesh is essentially a collection of resources. So you go to entries, and all the collections look and feel the same. They're really easy to work with. So now we can do listbox devices.items.add. We can take, how about we take the resource title, so this will be the name of the device, and we can add some other cool property like, so there's lots of interesting stuff you can find out about devices. How about we pick something like, you can tell if it's the local device you're on, is it online, is the remote connection active? Let's grab that property, and let's run that. So we're going to hit connect. The network's a little slow, so we might have to hit connect a little fewer times than I was expecting. But once that connection is established and you're connected to the cloud or the client, I'll show you that as well in a moment. There we go. Let's load all the devices. Here's all the devices in my mesh. None of them have remote connections going on to them right now. And if we look at my device ring, which you're all familiar with, you'll see those 4 devices showing up in there. And this device ring is essentially, think of it as just a pretty version, a visual representation over those resources. Give it a second to connect. Well, that'll be really challenging to do a demo to the cloud if we have no connectivity. But we might have to program everything against the local client, which will be equally fun. All right, so we'll let that guy go, and then we'll come back to it in a sec. All right, so that's devices. Now let's talk about mesh objects. Mesh objects are a very interesting entity, and we'll talk about them a bit later on. Mesh objects, think of them as the unit of sharing and replication in the mesh. Virtually everything interesting is a mesh object. If you think about a live folder, how many people know what a live folder is? If you use mesh, hopefully all of you, otherwise you really didn't use it and you were BSing me before. Live folders are a type of a mesh object. A mesh object is, think of it as a collection of feeds. You can put lots of data in it. We represent files as media resources in it. We represent the folders essentially as data entries and feeds. And we take those, we synchronize them. They have members and all sorts of interesting stuff we'll learn about. So everything's a mesh object where you put data. So I could do something like this. For each, how about mesh object live effects.mesh objects entries. And again, take the list box of mesh objects, .items, .add, and these are all the mesh objects we have. Excellent. Now let's see what it takes to create a new one. So over here, we'll type in the name of a new mesh object we want to create, and we'll create it. So to create a new one, not rocket science, you can imagine what this would look like in managed code. New mesh object, give it a title if you want. You don't have to, so let's grab that text box with the mesh object title in it and make a new mesh object. Go to live effects mesh collection, mesh objects.add, done. Got to do this by ref. We can talk about that later. We can fight about it. Let's connect and see that in action. This, hopefully, wow, hopefully we really didn't lose connectivity. There we are. There's our devices. Let's load. There's all my mesh objects, that media center guide, my pictures, music, PDC stuff, videos. And if I want to create a new mesh object, hello PDC, create this puppy. Of course, if I hit the load button again, since I didn't clear the list box, we're just going to get dupes, but that's probably okay. There we go. There's the mesh object. We just created it. Now, there's lots of powerful things you could do with mesh objects, which we'll do in a second. And first, let's take a look at data feeds. Data feeds, you can have lots and lots of data feeds in mesh objects, and there are a few special data feeds. So if you have a live folder, it has a data feed called live mesh files, where files live, but you can create lots of other data feeds. So if we want to load that, so let's go ahead and do something like this. Let's get the mesh object we selected. Let's typecast this list box, mesh object. I'm being really sloppy. That doesn't count against my coding skills for today. I think it's selected item. There we go. So this is the mesh object we pick, and now let's enumerate all the files in it. To do that, let's get a data feed, and we're going to find the data feed, which is the one that has all our live mesh files in it. So .data feeds, now you can send a query in. Usually you do this with a link query to find the right one. You can enumerate through them. They have all sorts of cool stuff, but I have an extension method for us for today, get by title. Let's get the live mesh files feed. And once we do that, again, simple enumeration over that. So for every file in the data entries collection for that feed, let's go ahead and add that to that. There we go. So we just got the mesh object. We went and got its data feed that has the live mesh files in it, and we're going to list them over here. And if we can actually get back to our live desktop, if anybody from our ops team is watching, please get our live desktop back up and running. All right, so we're connected. Let's load mesh objects. Let's find my pictures one. Let's load the data feed. There we go. So here's all the pictures. And if I had my live desktop open, you'd be able to see all my pictures in it. And so that's all the files in that mesh object that are easy to work with. Let's go ahead and add a filter. So what I'll do over here is we'll pick some sort of filter by name, by size, by something, and we'll filter on that using link. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll wire up the filter box. So to filter, let's go ahead and get the, let's see, what shall we do? Let's do this again. And let's go ahead and take the list box and clear what's in there so we can see that. And now we can go ahead and do something like this. So varq equals, let me see what query you want to send. So let me see, I have a query that I wrote up this morning that I really liked. Oh, yeah, one by size. That's cool. So that's a good one. It's hard to think of really good queries. So take the files feed, the data feed, data entries, and let's select where, I think it's data feed.resource, such a big resource model. Dot length, I think it is. Is that right? Oh, no, dot media entry. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So if you take the data entry, find its media, where is it? Sorry, give me a second. Media resource. There we go. So each data entry has a media resources associated, which essentially is the binary blob that data entry represents. So if you have a file, all its metadata is on the data entry, so its title, its size, things like that. But the actual binary info lives in the media resource. So we take the length property. So let's find all the ones that are smaller than, I think we're going to have to do something like this in here. Let's get a inversion of the text box filter. Okay. And now that we have all these data entries, same thing, just let's add them back into that list box. Sorry. Nobody called me out on that one? That was a free poster. Oh, damn. All right, come on over there. There we go. All right, that's 5 posters that are gone. List files.items.add. Lowercase s? Wow. I'll give you 10 posters for that. How's that? What's that? Oh, nobody caught that one. All right, let's run that, see what happens. Connect. Oh, I'm out of posters already. We haven't even started. For the love. Somebody wants to come up here and code for me? We do a Don and Chris show. I'll teach you how to program in real time. All right, so let's load all our mesh objects. Let's find the pictures guy. Let's load its data feeds. Let's filter. I have no idea how big these pictures are. Let's try 3,000. Obviously not. There we go. Ooh, one guy. That's going to be all of them. Where they go, somewhere in between them. So that's how easy it is to filter data entries, feeds, mesh objects. It applies to all the resources we have. Let's now upload a new picture into that collection. So upload button, I think I have an open file dialog box somewhere. Let's open up a file. Open dialog box. And now we want to add a new, not just a new data entry, which is easy, a new data entry and a media resource. So if we grab this data feed, same thing. Look, I'm going to copy paste so I don't lose any more posters. Data feed.dataentries.add. Few nice overloads so you can add a new data entry, created one, or you can actually provide a stream or a path to a file, hopefully. Maybe. Sorry? Yeah. Yes, one day we will care about that. So let's go ahead and add a new data entry. Let me see if I've got hopefully we have a good one somewhere around here. I think I have one somewhere that we'll be able to pick. So let's do a file open read on that and get a stream. So file open read on the, where's our dialog box? Open file dialog box.file name. That should be good enough to get that puppy uploaded up there, right? What's wrong with this guy? Oh, you know what? I need a slug. That's really lame. So my PDC pic.jpg. There we go. All right. So let's try that again. Now, the nice thing about that is that you can actually do this again against the client and the cloud. It makes it really easy, what we call sort of our symmetric programming model that allows you to use the same code depending on where you're connected to initially. You don't have to rewrite your code. So we're connected, load my pictures, load that feed. There we go. Let's upload a picture. Pick something new and exciting. Hopefully you've never seen demos with those pictures in them. So that guy's getting uploaded right now, and maybe I can hit, so I can actually show it to you. You know what? We'll upload it, and then we'll download it again since our live desktop can't show it to you. Let's refresh this guy. Hopefully we have, there it is. my PDC pic that we just uploaded, and it's now part of this mesh object. It's synchronizing. It's literally that easy. Okay, let's get news. News are really interesting because news are really fairly complicated to work with, unfortunately, and we're going to make this much easier. So in order to load your news, why are news so interesting? So there's two different kinds of news, right? There's news that are persisted, and these are things you see in the news feed and things like that. And there's another type of notification or an event that we call activities, and those are more transient or ephemeral. Think of all the state changes that happen, devices going online and offline, people moving between live folders. There's lots and lots of state. Some state we keep in memory and we never persist. Some state we persist and replicate. News have a bunch of interesting characteristics. There's the actor, the person that took action, the action that they took, for example, Ori updated, and then the object that worked on foo. And so to create all sorts of clever templates to work with them. So if we grab this mesh object, and let's go look at the news collection, which you see in the UI quite a bit. So I could do for each n in m.news.entries. Now, getting the text is not as simple. I have an extension method for us, and so we'll do this.listbox news.add news.getMessageText. You'll learn more about this in other sessions, but essentially, getMessageText takes that actor, the object, and the action reconstructs that text so we can display it in the dialog box. Now, if we wanted to create a new news item, let's make a new news item as well. So that's pretty easy. And there's different kinds of news that can be generated, and we're going to generate a user post. And to generate a user post, we're going to grab this mesh object we selected and say m.news.addUserPost, which is another sample extension methods to help us write faster code. And we'll say hello mesh. And let's run that. So that's devices, mesh objects, data feeds and files, and now news. We'll do media resources next. We'll connect. Let's see. Where should we put a new news item? How about in my music? And actually, there's not going to be any news there. So let's load the news for my pictures. There's a bunch of them. Can't really read them because it's too small. And if I want to create a new one, oh, I didn't get the text from this box, so it's nobody caught that. You guys are sleeping. So we're going to create a new news item that just says hello from mesh or hello PDC or whatever it was. Reload these. And actually, it's going to take a few seconds because there's another interesting thing about news that's, we'll load them in a sec, you'll see them. It takes a few seconds because what we do is we do news coalescing. So there's so much data and so much state is generated in a typical mesh between multiple devices, multiple people sharing, that we have to aggregate. So for example, if you create, let's say, 5,000 files or even 200 files, and you're sharing them with a person, the last thing you want to see is, Ori edit file 1, Ori edit file 2, 200 times. So there's lots of interesting algorithms that coalesce and compress and do clever processing of news to make the load manageable. In a few seconds, that news item will show up, and we'll take a look at it. OK, so let's go ahead and take a look at what it takes to load media resources. And for that, let's go ahead and grab how about the data entry that we select? We'll convert that from the data entry list box, or no? From the files list box. All right. Let's grab this guy. So that's the data entry we're working with. We uploaded a file. Now let's try to download a file. So we'll take that picture box, that image, and I think this should work. Let's take read media resource. So it's interesting. Of course, everything we have has async methods, and you really should be using those and try catching all the issues that can happen. But let's try this and run that. So we'll see both the news, hopefully have shown up by now, and the media resource for the picture that we uploaded. Give that a sec. Still no live desktop. Amazing. Proxies. No proxies on this machine since we're just connected directly. But we'll check that in a sec. So let's grab my pictures, load the data feed. Actually, we can load its news and see if there's hello mesh that we said earlier. What did we upload? We uploaded this guy. So let's grab that and see what happens. And there it is. So we created that data feed. We had a data entry. We uploaded a media resource to it. And then we went back and sucked it back from the sky, got the news for it. All pretty simple. You can hopefully see how each of these matches up to UI elements you see in live desktop in our mesh client. OK, so that's that. Let's now try contacts. Contacts are fascinating because we have so many of them. in our database that you really do want to be doing a lot more queries than enumeration. But for today, how about for each C in liveFX.contacts? There it is. Listbox, contacts.items.add C, that easy. Now, before running that, let's talk about profiles. Profiles are also really interesting because there's so much data we keep in our profile database. People keep, dating profiles, which we're not going to use today, profiles around their interests, work profiles, personal profiles. They have pictures in them, and you can really use a lot of that data in your applications to make them more sort of people-friendly, more social, more aware, and we have a whole session on that. So when we load the profile, let's grab the contact that we just selected from the list box, items, selected item. And now, so there's a bunch of things. One, we can take how about we take the text box that says interests and wire that up to C dot, it's a general profile. I think it's about you profile. I don't even remember. Let's try that. Is there an interests one on this? No, that's a general. Where are the interests? I think it's c.profiles.getAboutYouProfile.interests. There's that one. And thanks, Nishant, I heard that. And let's load the picture for this profile as well. And for that, we can do picture box profile.image equals new bitmap. I'm trying to remember where that is. I think that's on contact dot. Let's see, profiles dot. I know where it is. Another extension method for us. Get thumbnail image. There we go. Let's run that. So now we're actually able to go mine your social graph. You can actually traverse, if you have delegated off to somebody's social graph, if they permitted you to mine their social graph, you can actually keep mining and mining and mining and traverse and do 6 degrees of separation, essentially. And there's lots and lots and lots of interesting data in there. So did we connect? There we go. Let's load all my contacts. Let's find somebody like Nicole. Let's click load on her profile. You'll get her profile from Windows Live Storage and her profile picture. And there's a wealth of data in there. You guys can go mine that to death as long, socially and economically responsibly, as we call it. Okay, last one, notifications, before we move on. So on the connect method, how about we do this? After we connect, we'll do something like this. LiveFX .mesh objects change notification received. Get that event handler, and let's try this. We'll talk about what this is doing. Text box notification. Just do something really simple like this. Not super interesting, but easy enough. So notifications are also pretty cool because you can register for change notifications from the cloud using our notification queues. You can also register for change notifications on the client. And what that allows you to do essentially is to watch for changes over the different styles of feeds, so devices feeds, mesh object feeds, data feeds, whatever. And so if we go and create a new mesh object and hit create, we're actually doing this against the cloud and getting reverse a notification in here that something has changed in that feed. We go query and data mine and figure out what happened. Okay, so what did we do? In, I think it was about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, we wrote a simple app that can get all your devices, which you can render on the device ring. We got all your mesh objects, which renders all the live folders on your live desktop. We got the files in them, which is the view that shows you all the files in your live folders. We got the news, which is on the right pane. We got mesh resources, which is the thumbnail images, essentially, you get to see when you use our media view. Contacts, when you want to pick members to add to, you can do a contact picker and invite people to share with. Profiles, you don't see in RUX, so there's a new feature. Did we miss anything? Oh, we missed members. Well, if we have time, we'll do that at the end. But if you want to enumerate the members of a mesh object, all the people you're sharing with, you can probably imagine by now how easy that is. Go to the members collections and just enumerate what's in there. So, I'm out of breath. That was a crash course in Live Framework 101. And that's very pink. Let's keep going. Okay, so now that I've shown you what it is, let me actually tell you what Live Framework is. We're doing this in reverse. We talked about it being the uniform way to program against live services, and hopefully that helped you a little bit realize just how easy it is to get going and how powerful it is. But there's a lot more under the cover. It's actually a fairly sophisticated system that's composed of two elements. One, the live operating environment. Think of it again, the runtime like CLR-EE. But also a complete programming model, which you can think of almost like the BCL, if you want to do that analogy. So the live operating environment has two versions. There's one that runs on the client called the client live operating environment, the cloud one that runs in our data center. And it does a lot of stuff for you. It does CRUD operations and sync and caching and data analytics and all sorts of clever stuff. So your application doesn't have to worry about it. It does a lot of the heavy lifting when we talked about those hard problems. On top of it, we layer what we call the resource model. And the resource model is a way for us to essentially model or describe all those entities, all those elements in your digital life. So whether it's your profiles and contacts or pictures or calendar or whatever personal data people have, applications to manage applications, deploy applications, update them, etc., communications to do peer-to-peer and notifications and awareness and all that, somehow you have to describe all of that. And that's built on top of the mesh services, users mesh, devices, applications, and sync, as we talked about earlier. Now, one interesting thing about the resource model is that it is essentially one of the pillars is universal accessibility. And that means that we created a very basic info set, essentially, that we can use to represent all this stuff. And the goal was to be able to render it in whatever mechanism the developer felt most compelling for the way they write code. And so we have a common way to render this data to an application. Then we have a common sets of operations. So you could do CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations, very popular these days, Atom, pub-like. We could do URI to link mappings. We could do resource scripting, which allows you, tomorrow we have an advanced session on that. I encourage you to go watch that. It's very cool. Resource scripts do batching. We have triggers, authorization services in there, introspection, which allow you to essentially dynamically discover the things you can talk to. And then we layer on top of it a way to, you could do this over Atom Pub. If you want to sync, you could do it with feed sync. If you want Atom or JSON or POX or RSS, whatever works for you. But we all know, at least I know, as a developer, I'm super lazy and I'm hardly ever going to handcraft XML over the wire. And I'm always going to be using some sort of API or toolkit. And so what we've done today, we actually used our .NET Framework API toolkit, which if you're a C# guy, works fabulous. Of course, you don't have to use it. Don and Chris in the keynote, if you showed, most likely, I didn't watch it, but my bet was they didn't use our API kit. They probably just did HTTP web requests. We have a Silverlight kit, a JavaScript kit. We're working on a kit for PHP, and the community will build 50 of them, and we can't wait for that. We'll have controls and all sorts of good stuff on top. And no Microsoft stack diagram would be complete without the tools. Of course, we have Visual Studio designers. They're very cool to help you build mesh applications. We have a developer portal that you've seen in the keynotes that helps you upload and manage your applications. We have an analytics system that helps you understand what users are doing with your application. It's also how we do billing one day, when we're going to charge you for some of this stuff. And it's a great place, essentially, for you to live. We have a sandbox over there, so if you just want to test your code, which is the CTP that you're about to receive, or you have received today if you got an account on it, is a sandbox place for developers. You can go wild and break stuff and not worry about it. Responsibly, of course. Okay, so the resource model, let's talk about that. Actually, before we even get there. A couple years ago when we sat down and started to construct the resource model, just close your eyes for a second and imagine a whole bunch of Microsoft propeller heads getting in a room to decide how they're going to describe all the interesting data in the world. You can imagine about 30 different ways, lots of heated arguments, hundreds of whiteboards written on in white to decide, should we do it this way or that way, proprietary format, open format, like a million different ways you can represent this stuff. Eventually, in order to settle the argument, so to speak, we had to adhere to a couple of basic principles. One of the principles was simplicity. Like, how many of you guys have been Microsoft customers for more than 5 years or something like that? There you go. So you're probably well familiar with our desire as engineers to always over-engineer everything. Our goal was to not over-engineer this problem and actually adhere to simplicity as a principle. The second one, kind of unique for Microsoft, the second one was about openness. And that's another fairly unique element of the resource model. Everything should be open and universally accessible from any device, platform, programming language. The third one, we wasn't something that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And we wanted to pick something that developers were already familiar with. Specifically, these days the community on the web has voted with their feet that they like this concepts of feeds and data entries and Atom Pub and all this stuff. We said, sounds good, let's do that. So the whole resource model starts with that notion of a data entry. And data entries, as you saw, can be associated with resources. There are blobs associated with the metadata. You take multiples of these, you can relate them to each other, and you get sort of relationships. You can simulate hierarchy. You take these, you put them in a data feed, and now you have a collection of these things that's easy and consistent to program against. You take data feeds, multiples of them, you put them inside a mesh object, and you say, hey, that's a pretty good unit to collect all this data and metadata. Then you say, you know what? There's some special feeds, right? So there's a members feed. So if you wanted to take a folder and share it with your mom, you take your mom and you put her in that members feed, and now you're sharing it with her. If you want to take a device and share or synchronize with it, you put the device in the mappings feed. The mapping essentially maps objects to devices. So if you have a pictures folder or a pictures mesh object or some other type of custom data you create, you want to synchronize it to your phone, you add the phone data entry into the mappings feed, and away you go. And we have a news feed, we have subscriptions for notification feeds, everything looks and feels the same, pretty straightforward. You take lots of mesh objects, you put them in a mesh. And a mesh has a few other interesting collections. The collections of devices, which is a feed of feeds also. Applications, news, notifications. Again, you get the idea. There's lots more boxes. I'm kind of simplifying it. You add things like scripting and profiles and contacts. You wire that into the root of the live operating environment, and away you go. You've got the live framework resource model. Now, the resource model, again, there's lots and lots of boxes. You'll learn lots about this in different kinds of sessions. Let's actually take a look at it under the covers and see what it really looks like, because we've been kind of spoiled with our .NET Kit. So let's go ahead and open up our resource model browser. And most of you probably have never seen this tool. It's a tool that comes in our SDK. It's pretty basic. It allows you to essentially navigate. It's like a browser. You put in a URL. It allows you to navigate to it. So let's go ahead and navigate to the cloud live operating environment. We'll give it a second to connect. And what you'll see, should plug in my 3G card, we'll probably be better off. What you'll see on the root is, just like you saw in that slide, there's mesh. You're looking at this in Atom format. We'll switch formats in a second. There's mesh, there's my contacts, there's scripts. If I go look inside my mesh, actually, let me show you this. This is the URL we're on, user.ctp.windows.net. You've probably learned by now that all the Azure resources and services are on windows.net. We are user.windows.net, since it manages all of the user's data, devices, applications, data, et cetera, . So user.ctp, since we're CTP mode, that's the URL we're on. And notice we have a devices feed, we have a news feed, notifications, applications, mesh objects. So if we click in the mesh objects feed, there is our, that's the one we created during the demo. There's the Hello PDC one, and you'll notice a mesh object has data feeds, members, mappings, activities, subscriptions, etc. Now, if you're not an Atom guy and you're a JavaScript guy, you'll be delighted because you can just ask for this exact same feed in a different format. So you can ask for it in JSON, and if you are Don Box and you're kind of old school and you want it in POX, you can ask for it in POX, and if you want to point your RSS reader at this feed, you can ask for it in RSS format. It's that easy. Now, something that's even cooler than that, so you saw this URL, we're talking to the cloud. What if I do this? Notice this URL. Oh, sorry. The local live operating environment has a local HTTP port you can talk to exactly the same way as you can talk to the live operating in the cloud. And that's hugely important. Just pause for a second and think about what that means. When it comes to symmetry, the ability to provide a symmetric programming model between what's running on the cloud, what's running on the client, and enable your applications. If you're that Media Center app, you don't want to ever have to worry about talking to the cloud, authenticating, network latency, synchronizing with it. You can just talk to the local endpoint. When you do livefx.connect, you could just do .connect local and be done with it and talk to that endpoint. That same set of feeds, if I go and click into, let's pick ours mesh objects. Those exact same mesh objects are being served off of the local runtime. And the beauty of that, again, you don't have to worry about all those complicated things. You don't have to worry about how we're going to sync it. So when you can put custom data in all these things. You can use data contract serialization, create a class, put it into a data entry. We'll serialize, deserialize it for you, all against the local runtime, which is really beautiful. And that is, again, sort of one of the big powers of the live framework is not just giving you a big service in the sky, but really tying it to a local device programming model. So if you want to do something like open up our cute little curl prompt. So if you want to do something like this, just so you don't think I'm cheating in that app, let's do that. Let's see who answers on this port. Not terribly pretty, so how about we do this? Ask for this in JSON. Not so pretty. Let's do that, pipe that to tidy JSON. There we go. All right, so there's the local mesh endpoint, just asking for that URL. So if I go and ask for v0.1/mesh, there's my mesh. There's all the links in my mesh on the local host. So if I ask, for example, /mesh/devices, literally I just sent in a request to the local endpoint, get nice response back. You can run an API kit over that. It's that easy. So if you, for example, don't want to use curl, let's say you are, how many people here have tried Iron Python at some point? Very few, I bet. Iron Python is super cool. So there's my Iron Python console. So if I want to do something like import live operating environment, and then I want to do something like this, equals live operating.connect. Give that a second. We're going to get some auth credentials. And you can run these again. The first one I ran against the local endpoint. This one I'm running against the cloud endpoint. So now I could do something like this for I in livefx.mesh. I can get tab completion even, which is really cool. Mesh.mesh objects tab completion. Oh, doesn't work as well. Entries. And then I could do something like this, print i.resource.title. There's all the mesh objects in my mesh. And so you have a lot of flexibility in how you write code. You can write, and again, from any platform, any programming language, any way you want it. It's kind of like an as-you-like programming stack. Client, cloud, multiple devices, blah, blah, blah. Really quite beautiful. So let's talk about application types. So what types of applications do we expect to see in the wild that use the Live framework and the Azure platform in general? Well, one, there's all these applications that run on devices. Think like headless devices. Like I have a very cool app I've been working on. You'll actually get to see it this week on Channel 9. It's called the Meshmobile. My car is fully connected to the mesh. It's a very cool app. It reports GPS location into the mesh. So you can go to my live desktop if it was on there, see where my car is at. It has onboard diagnostics. Oh, it's back up? Hey, Vlad says it's back up. Thanks, Vlad. Was it your storage service that went down? Okay, well, front end with bad certificates. What a lame excuse. I will get back to that one in a second, now that it's up and running. Device-style applications, headless or not, digital picture frames, mobile phones, whatever you want. Social and community sites, so you think the beautiful ability, we'll show you some demos this week. Imagine you upload a bunch of photos to your mesh, and they magically synchronize to Flickr. You add a Flickr album, they magically show up on your devices. We have cool scenarios. Take a picture with your camera. It's instantly on your PC. Sync that up to some third-party photo service. It's back available in your mesh. It's up, in your mom's digital picture frame halfway across the planet. Social sites, imagine syncing Flickr or Twitter or Facebook news feeds with your mesh. Web to client, this is imagine taking really cool web applications and essentially being able to take them offline, as you saw in the keynote this morning. Great session tomorrow by Arash on how to do that, building mesh-enabled web applications, giving you offline capabilities, giving you access to people's social graph, data in their mesh, and of course, client to the web, being able to take rich client applications, Media Center, Word. Like, how exciting would it be if you have you install a version of Microsoft Office and all your settings magically showed up, so I don't have to configure my dictionary for Word and my views in Excel and all those kinds of things. And all the way, literally imagine a world you go and you buy a PC, which today probably takes you 2 days to set up at home if you're lucky. You buy a new PC, you plug it in the wall, sign-in dialog comes up, you type in your username, password. All the settings for that device come from the sky. All your data shows up, your applications show up. It's naturally part of your mesh without you having to do much. Like there's an infinite number of possibilities around the types of applications and experiences you can create for end users when you really combine those 4 dimensions, data, devices, apps, and people. So to wrap up and give us just enough time for some questions, and we can go back to live desktop, see where the Meshmobile is at. Hopefully it's not moving. That'd be very disturbing. I'll have to cut early. Live services, really all about building those highly scalable services that are running in the sky, giving you all that great stuff, identity and storage and comms and directory. Think of Live Framework really as the way you will naturally program against those services on the cloud or on clients. Get started today. If you're doing in hands-on labs, one of our hands-on labs will give you a token, and you're able to get that token, go to the portal, register, provision your account, and start playing with this cool stuff. And then just go and meshify things. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And we're going to take some questions. If you can, please go ahead and thanks. If you can go up to the mic, that'd be great. If not, you can shout it out to me and I'll repeat it. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
How about coverage for the Apple Mac? I've got a community of people that seem to use Audio.
Sure. How about coverage for the Apple Mac? So in the keynote this morning, David Cherdwell announced that we're making a client for Mac available. It will not have the ability to program against it yet. We're working on that. As soon as we get around to having a developer offering on there, we'll post it in our blog and you'll be able to program against it, but no date as of yet. Live Mesh, the client, the experience you have today, yes, we have a Mac client. It's very cool. I love it. It works really well. I encourage you to go and get it and play with it. Question?
Yeah. Is Windows Home Server uses the live services?
Say again, is Windows?
Windows Home Server.
Windows Home Server.
Is it meshified?
Is it meshified? Oh, I'm going to love hearing that question. Is Windows Home Server meshified? So interestingly enough, we have a project. Now, there we go. Raise your hand over there. So that gentleman over there in the corner works on a project that we're using to prototype and meshify Home Server. There's actually a session at the conference about the work we're doing that. I encourage you to go and see Doug's session. He'll tell you all about it. But yes, we think that's a killer scenario that we're working on. Love that scenario. Another question. I was wondering, third question. Usually that's the first or second. You guys are a little slow. Conflict resolution. The question is, are there mechanisms for conflict resolution? We have an entire sync. You know what I forgot to do? There we go. Here's all the sessions you can learn about in depth, about everything in, interesting? Don't go to these sessions, go to these ones. Sessions about communications and building mesh applications and synchronization and identity and all that stuff in great depth. We have a whole session on sync. You'll learn about conflict resolution. But yes, one of the best things about our sync infrastructure, we use FeedSync for it. We do conflict detection. When we can, we'll let the application usually decide how they want to resolve the conflict. There's some pretty basic ways you can resolve conflicts, last writer wins, things like that. But we expect most applications will actually opt to detect, get the conflict detection from us and actually do conflict resolution on their own. And there are good ways for you to do that, both in the APIs and in the underlying infrastructure. Go ahead.
Yeah, you spoke about the local operating environment, and it wasn't clear to me whether that's just a developer tool to help you debug and stuff, or does that actually get deployed with your app and it gives you a complete offline experience automatically?
Good question. So the live operating environment, is that something just for developers? Actually, no. The live operating environment comes every time you install the Live Mesh client. It's actually powered by the live operating environment. Think of it as a, if you ever look in your process list, you'll see there's an XE that sits there. Today it's called Mo, M-O-E, used to be the mesh operating environment. It runs and powers essentially all the functionality we do on the client. It's taking care of sync and peer-to-peer and authentication and bringing apps offline and managing them. And it's there available to you 24/7 essentially as long as the device has had the client installed on it. So it's not just for developers, although there are some tweaks you can make to it to make developing and debugging against it easier. You'll read about those in our SDK in our blog. But it's used by apps and developers alike.
But if I want to build an offline experience, is there extra work to do that? Or are you suggesting that just by having this thing on there and it'll sync up, and if I lose a connection, I'll continue to use my local cache kind of thing automatically?
Yes, if your application is using data entries essentially to store its data in, you can always talk to the live operating environment locally. It'll take care of background sync. It'll take care of when you're offline and online. You won't actually know the difference when you're talking to it.
That's nice. Thanks.
Cool.
I guess I'm asking the inverse question of what he was just asking. Is it possible to use this framework without using the client-side infrastructure, synchronization, and so on? Just use it to access the user's online Windows Live data?
Absolutely. So the question is, well, you heard it. Can you just use the online interfaces to access Windows Live data for users? Absolutely. This is like, think of it like a Chinese menu. You pick and choose the things you want. You can just talk to the cloud, to Live Framework in the cloud, and you can just get, let's say, contacts or files and photos from the mesh or whatever you want without having to use anything else. You don't even need to use a library. As long as you can talk HTTP and you can authenticate, you're good to go. Good question.
Will Microsoft build the equivalent of the iTunes App Store for mesh apps?
Will Microsoft build the equivalent of the iTunes App Store for mesh apps? Let me answer this way. So today, you'll go learn about this tomorrow, but if you build a mesh-enabled web application, there's actually a catalog of applications that I'll just whoop up real quick since our cloud is back up and running without bad certs this time. Let's go here. There's actually a list of applications in the online sort of catalog you get to pick from and install these mesh-enabled web applications that will run in the live desktop and run on your client. Over time, you can imagine this infrastructure being enhanced to supporting all sorts of applications. No specific announcements or dates or capabilities, but absolutely, I mean, you can imagine the ability to easily discover applications and capabilities to run online or offline, I think is hugely valuable. It's as easy, literally, there's the web guide that we used. It's as easy as click add to your mesh. And pretty trivial to use for end users. Good. Somebody's thinking already about making money.
Hi. You currently need a US Live ID. When are you opening it to the world?
Do we still require that? I thought we just lifted that restriction.
Thursday.
Thursday? Who said that? Jeremy. There we go. Thanks, Jeremy. Thursday. How's that? For a precise answer.
Hi. My question is, you mentioned something about the relationships between data entries. Where can we learn more about it, or can you like briefly give an quick overview?
Sure, I'll give you a 60 seconds, and you'll be able to learn. My guess is Raymond, who has a talk coming after me, will probably talk a little bit about that, and you can certainly ask him. Raymond knows more about this than anyone. It's pretty simple, really. So if you think about, you have two data entries. Yeah, let's use this as an example. When you create a folder, and you have nested folders in it, so the root folder is essentially, think of a mesh object, but all the subfolders in there are actually represented as data entries, and they have a parent ID, and by establishing a parent-child relationship, you can quickly and easily simulate hierarchy. And that's actually what we use sort of linking between data entries for.
Okay.
Make sense?
So,
think like the relation.
Only you can have one data entry related to only one other parent entry, kind of.
No, you are completely free to create as many links between them as you want. So every collection, the links collection, is fully extensible. So you can go and put 17,000 links in there. You might be the only application that understands the relationships. We expect most apps to understand the parent-child relationship. But if you create new ones and link them any way you want, you're free to do that.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
You mentioned web-enabled mesh applications. What technologies will people be able to use to build such applications? JavaScript, Silverlight, etc.?
Absolutely, rocking. So tomorrow there's a whole talk by Arash on building mesh-enabled web applications. Man, we need a short name for that. How about mesh apps? You can build them essentially anything you can render in a browser, JavaScript, Silverlight. Arash will show you both tomorrow. If you want to build it in Flash, Party, it's just a web app, client-side web app, of course.
Back to the local mesh operating environment, could that exist in a firewalled system without dialing back to Redmond?
Can the live operating environment exist in a firewalled environment without dialing back to Redmond? Well, it's kind of tricky. If you completely cannot see our cloud, it's going to be very hard for you to sign in, authenticate, sync. That said, we do have support for doing, think of it as smart NAT traversals, hopping through firewalls, things like that, especially when you want to do peer-to-peer stuff. One of the best things about our comms protocols is that you don't always have to go through the cloud for everything. If your devices can exchange data peer-to-peer, they should do that. Cheaper for us, better for you as a developer and an end user for sure. If your IT department completely blocks off all calls to our data center, you're pretty much out of luck. I mean, it'll still run, and just won't be able to talk to anything.
Right. Okay. So, but the concept of using the identity services but keeping the data internal, which the data is the more sensitive part anyway. That would just be a matter of firewall tweaking.
I know that's an interesting question. Is Jeremy still here? Jeremy, raise your hand. I think you two should hook up over there in the back and have a chat.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I have two questions. The first question is about the data that's placed within the mesh, right? So when users upload data and all that, is there any legal sort of things that they can upload these kind of data, and how do we kind of ensure that it's not a virus that they put on 10 other devices that people are syncing to, etc.?
Very good question.
And the second question is about the pub sub when you're doing a synchronization. If you're kind of having one of the devices trigger off a pub sub with the other devices, it might not always be the right thing because this device might be going offline very soon or something. So is it possible for a device to trigger off some kind of synchronization between other devices and itself not just participate but just trigger it off and kind of
Sure, let's start with the first question. The first question around what kind of data can you put in the mesh? Part one is, the obvious. There are terms. Windows Live and Microsoft in general has a terms of use agreement with all users and developers around appropriate content that can live in our data centers. No illegal certain type of pictures, no copyrighted content, things like that. We both validate using technology. We have things that actually scan for inappropriate content. But also you're legally bound to by accepting the terms of use. We do not, beyond things we can do with technology like scan for inappropriate pictures and things like that, we don't do a lot of active enforcement on that side. Of course, if we do find that stuff, we take that very, very seriously and do take active enforcement role. But it's really up to you. I mean, you should use it responsibly. The second part around synchronization, one of the nice things is that through essentially the process of convergence, if one device goes offline, when you're synchronizing data, you may be getting it from multiple sources at the same time. So you could be getting part of the data from device A, part of the data from device B, part of the data directly from the cloud. Depending on where that data is available, we'll find the right way to move and synchronize it. So if your device is going offline, it actually doesn't have to even, we automatically detect the fact that it's no longer part or no longer available for synchronization. We'll converge with other devices. When it comes back online, we'll keep syncing with it. So most of that stuff is sort of naturally taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about it. Of course, if you're going off, if you're the device that is the only device that has that data, if you go offline and we can't get all of it somewhere else yet, you better get that data off you before you die, sort of thing.
Yeah. So just back on the first question, is there a way for people who are building applications on this to ensure that they don't allow their users or their network to kind of do anything, or do we just have to rely on the...
Yeah, there are two parts to that. I mean, one thing is we have a pretty robust sort of authorization system that we use. Like a mesh application can't naturally access all of a user's data. By default, it actually has access to no user data because we're there to protect the data. And we have an ability, you'll learn about that in other sessions, we have an ability for your application to essentially request access to different kinds of data. So you can request read access to my contacts. I'll get a dialog box and I can say, I allow your application for a duration of 24 hours to read my contacts. And you won't be able to write, and after 24 hours, you won't be able to access it. So we actually have this permissioning system in place that allows us to delegate, essentially, auth to different kinds of applications. The user is always in control. That's a huge thing about the mesh. It's more about the users than about us as developers because sort of everything revolves around that user, and trust is everything. If they don't trust your app and they don't trust what's going on with their data, no, you'd never use it. So as an application, you have to rely on us to make sure that delegated auth works correctly. But once somebody is granted you access, let's say, to their pictures folder, we don't do anything special to make sure you don't put funky pictures in there they didn't want. It's just like, think of it like a big hard drive, right? Like whatever you put in it, and be protected. Question, this side.
I believe right now all the folders are being replicated online. Is this something we can expect to see in a different way in the future? For example, excluding the online storage?
Yeah, actually, we turned that off a little while ago. We started off by having everything always sync to the cloud, mostly because we wanted to test out the system. We've turned that off now, and if you go over your quota, or you can just ask for Live Folder not to be mapped to Live TC or to Live Desktop, and it'll only synchronize peer-to-peer between your devices. That's also a great way not to go over your quota. So I certainly don't sync my terabytes of videos and music to the cloud, because even I don't have that kind of cloud storage out of the quota.
Actually, following from that question, is there a maximum size for files that will be synced between machines?
Between machines, or just... So, I mean, you have a quota for what's the max amount of storage you can have in the cloud. There's no quota on how much data you can synchronize peer-to-peer.
Not how much, but like, let's say I have a 20 gigabyte outlet.
Oh, a 20 gig file? Sorry, what is it? 500 gigs? That's, I guess, there's the answer.
500?
The man who actually controls all of the storage system is sitting right there. If you hit him with a bus, I'll be very upset. We'll be in deep trouble. But he can answer anything you want to know about storage. I guess 500 gigs is the limit file size. Hopefully that's not a problem for you.
That'll work. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, if you've got someone who, I guess, kind of owns data, and they share that data through the mesh with other people, what happens if someone you're sharing that data with deletes something that's shared? Does it get replicated back and deleted off the original system?
Well, there's different modes you could be sharing in. So if you're sharing and the person you are sharing that live folder with, you delegated essentially full access rights to that folder. Yes, if they delete a piece of data because you gave them full ownership, it'll be deleted from yours as well. If you gave them read-only participation, then they'll only be able to read, and if they delete something off their local drive, obviously that won't affect your data. So there's different sort of permission levels that you can give folks, but if you gave some full permissions, they're an owner like you essentially, and they can delete data.
Part two of that is, if I am the owner of data and I placed it out on the mesh for whatever reasons, and then let's say I'm going to get rid of the original laptop or whatever that I had that was on. I'm assuming there's a way to decouple so that I can clean that laptop without worrying about it affecting the mesh?
Yes, of course. Of course. That'd be a pretty scary scenario if you dumped your laptop and all your data was gone from everywhere. Kind of defeat the purpose of the scenario. Good question.
I've heard also about storage tables. Does the live mesh and the live framework have a table structure as well for storing data, or is it just blobs?
Well, we store both. We store metadata, structured data, so we can keep track of, think of like data feeds and data entries are really all metadata that you would store in something like tables, essentially. While blobs, we store in the blob store. So there's, we didn't talk about this in depth, but there's really two kinds of storage. We have a massive, massive blob store that you'll learn about as part of the Azure Services Platform. And there is a massive, essentially, metadata store that we have that's stored separately that you can index and search on and things like that.
So we can directly store data in that metadata?
Well, we don't give you direct table access. Here you get access through the resource model, through data entries, which are extensible. You can put custom data in there.
Okay.
But remember, this is very different than if you think about SQL, Azure SQL services in the sky, or even our Windows Azure table storage. This is storage that's associated with the user. So you're always storing it within a user's quota. It's almost, think of it like file system, registry, my documents in the sky, versus the lower level parts of the stack where you might be storing it. It's like your developer account that you provision and storing against it. It's not associated with the user or with somebody else's quota, right? So two different scenarios, and we can handle both. Right?
Okay, great.
Good.
What about live folder share? Have you guys put them out of business?
Put them out of business?
Well, is it now redundant? The live folder share.
So think about, there's two parts to that question, right? There's the experience itself, right, where the application you consume it through, and there's actually the plumbing underneath, right? The services that actually make. We all use. In general, think of live services. There's one common way we do identity, common way we do communications, common way we do storage, and now a programming model. Over time, I expect that it would only be natural for the user experiences to converge. Right? There's no, the world doesn't need 17 different ways for people to work with files and folders. But the infrastructure is sort of, when you're talking as a developer, the way you will program against these things, there's only one way to do that. And again, my expectation would be that over time experiences would converge based on user feedback or whatever our UX gurus decide is.
Sorry, hang on.
I can't hear you.
Just to finish that up, those who didn't catch it in this morning's keynote, I think David Treadwell actually said that the next version of Windows Live in the next calendar year is going to use the live mesh services as the basis for things like synchronization. So we are doing the right work.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think we have about one more minute. I can take a question.
I had a question again about synchronization. Is selective synchronization still coming where you can say synchronize this folder but not this file or not this subfolder?
Yes, that feature will be coming. I don't think we're sharing the date of when that feature is coming, but yes, we're working on that diligently. You can, it's kind of interesting because a lot of us on, who work on the team are sort of gadget headgears kind of guys, and so we are the first ones to request, man, I have 6 terabytes at home, help me out. And so we drive a lot of those feature requirements that maybe, I think our UX team would sometimes laugh at us and say, you are so not the typical use case. And so we kind of push the limits on that. But yes, we'd all love that feature to show up soon.
Okay.
That'd be good. I'll take one more if there's another question. If not, we'll call it a wrap-up. All right, great. Thanks very much, guys.